All right, we are recording. So welcome everybody. This is our, I think, third one of these chats that we're doing here. And we have RedBar HQ here, Kathleen McGivney and Adam Moore, our photographer, and then RedBar London and Glasgow and Edinburgh, etc. David Sharp. And we've got Rob and Joe from Grand Seiko that are gonna be here to talk to us about all kinds of Grand Seiko stuff. So I'll just hand it over to you guys to get started, and then we'll we'll let you guys chat for about an hour, and then we'll take some questions from. And again, for those of you that are participating, you can write comments in the chat function, and then if you have a question for the panel, just go ahead and pop it into the Q&A. Okay, I'll hand it over to you guys.
Well, thank you. I guess I'll start. But so yeah, Rob obviously from our UK section, and then I'm in the US, of course. So we're gonna give you a little kind of presentation to kind of go over some of the novelties that were introduced this year by Grand Seiko. And if you hear a squawking in the background, as I just did, I'm sorry. That's my 2-year-old son going absolutely crazy right now. So I apologize in advance for any other interruptions there may be. But what I'll do is I'll go ahead and start the screen share. And Rob will lead the way once I can get this up. So bear with me just a second here. All right. Hopefully everyone can see that clearly.
Yeah. Looking good. Right, we're up.
Well, Rob,
okay.
I'll let you take over. It's our 60th anniversary. Why don't you tell us about that?
Okay, so I'm Rob. I'm from Grand Seiko UK, and as Joe said, we're going to talk through the pieces that have launched in 2020 for Grand Seiko so far. To mention, as Joe just said, it is the 60th year anniversary for Grand Seiko this year. So Grand Seiko launched in 1960. The first watch they did, I actually am fashioning today, which is the 3180. The number 60 in horology obviously has an importance with 60 seconds, 60 minutes, but also in Japan, there's a huge importance for the 60th year because it means there's been a full cycle of the zodiac calendar. Now, that means in Japan that there's a rebirth and new energy. So it's an important time, and this is the year that we've entered for Grand Seiko. So there's a lot of new energy and new product coming through for us. So the first pieces that were introduced this year, the central one is a high beat piece. All of these pieces feature the limited edition Grand Seiko blue with the red detailing as contrast. The high beat piece is the 44 GS case, which was really the first piece that really showcased that Grand Seiko style from 1967. It has that beautiful Zaratsu finishing, and those angles on this case really show that distortion-free mirrored finish that Zaratsu has. The bottom left, you can see a limited edition quartz piece with a 5-point star at 6 o'clock. So the 5-star points there indicate that it has a tolerance of 5 seconds plus or minus a year. The dial on this one has a pattern on there you can't see particularly well on this image, apologies for that, but on the dial you can see 2020, which is obviously the year of the 60th year anniversary, and very discreetly by the 20th hour marker, there's actually a small GS hidden on the dial as well, which you probably wouldn't ever know is there unless you knew. Talking of this rebirth and new energy, they also feature a brand new feature on these quartz movements, which is a jumping hour hand. So you can actually adjust the hour hand without interrupting that precise timekeeping. Obviously good for travelers. The top right, I'm not sure if you can see because the videos might be in the way, but this is a sports quartz piece. It has a blue ceramic bezel which expands out from the dial and kind of flows very nicely. It's almost impervious to scratches. It has a Lumi Bright finish on the indices and is 20 bar with 16 AM resistance to magnetism. I'm going to rush through these all very quickly, as you've probably noticed, just so we can get through them and obviously get through to the Q&A. The bottom right is a ladies model. So this is a ladies automatic, and this automatic movement has been made specifically for ladies models, which is wonderful to see. It features that blue Grand Seiko dial, which is mother of pearl, and it has diamond hour markers along with a bezel with 45 diamonds, which ties in nicely to the diamond anniversary being the 60th year after all. I know there's one of your favorites in there, David.
There certainly is. The blue ceramic dialed quartz piece is just, I think it's just an awesome looking piece.
Yeah.
Jen, we actually have a question that's really relevant to those dials. It was just, and we can answer it later, but I just wanted to mention it, that somebody put in the Q&A that Grand Seiko dials are highly respected and they want to know more about how they're made. So think about that for after we're done with the presentation.
Yeah. Long answer.
Sounds like a good joke question.
Well, we'll come back to that at the end. So great question, though.
Yeah, so up next we have a great piece that really celebrates this anniversary as well. So it's a brand new professional divers at 600 meter. It's capable of saturation diving for both the water resistance and the helium, but doesn't feature a helium escape valve. It also has that Grand Seiko blue dial, and comes in at 46.9 millimeter, I believe. It's made of high intensity titanium, so it's 40% lighter than steel, but slightly harder. With this watch, as you can see, if you just flip through to the next slide, Joe. The actual power indicator there is split into 5 pieces. Now this is because the watch is not only more powerful, so has a longer power reserve, but it's also more precise and slimmer. I won't go too much into detail there because what Joe's going to cover after this is going to be the new movements, which obviously ties in very nicely to the new energy and rebirth. But what we have here is a power reserve that's split into 5 sections, one for each day, as this new spring drive caliber has a 5-day power reserve or 120 hours. The hand on this power reserve is a red, and onto that blue background, it's almost as if it's kind of a dawning of a new day, which ties in beautifully with this anniversary piece. The watch there, as I said, is a reasonable size, but that's not my wrist. I think it must be Joe's, but fits still very nicely on the wrist. And with that thinner caliber means the watch, means that the watch sits much more comfortably on the wrist. It's easy to maintain because it can be deconstructed from the front and comes with a blue silicone strap. So next up is another limited edition to celebrate the anniversary. This is the SLGH002. It's a 40 millimeter yellow gold piece. It was based upon that 44GS case that we saw earlier, but has been subtly modernized. It has wider lugs and is a slimmer case, so it sits really nicely onto the wrist. The legibility has been improved on this piece with, as you can see, wider indices, and the hour hand is also wider to improve that legibility. What's really exciting about this piece, and as I said, I won't go into detail now as well, is the movement is a brand new movement which is in-house, as all of Grand Seiko. It's a 9SA5 movement, and it now has an 80-hour power reserve for a high beat movement, which I believe, Joe can correct me when he moves on to movements, but I believe it's the longest power reserve for a high beat movement. Not only that, but it's actually 15% slimmer. So the next 2 pieces that we're going to cover are 2 manual wind pieces that have been created to celebrate the natural beauty of Shizuku Ishi. It's taken me a while to master saying that. This particular one has a nice legendary story behind it. So the story is that 1,000 years ago, there was an old Japanese man who was in this region of Japan. He could hear a noise in the distance, and he went to go explore to find out what this particular noise was. He came across a huge cedar tree, and below this cedar tree was a big cave. When he went into this cave, he could see water dropping from the roof of the cave onto a rock. And it was that noise that was echoing through the cave and through the forest of this region of Japan that drew his attention. Now, when you deconstruct the word of Shizuku Ishi, Shizuku means dropping water and Ishi means rock. So that's where the legend comes from to say that this is this region of Japan. That is where the name has come from. This is the region of Japan where our mechanical watch studio is based, and this watch has been hand engraved on a white gold curved plate dial. The hour markers, as you can see, is a water droplet as it kind of splashes onto the rock, and it's been hand engraved by Kiyoshi Teru and his team, and he's a master engraver. And obviously with it being a curved white gold dial, it's extremely difficult and it's very intricate. It's a platinum case, platinum 950, and comes in at 39mm. So I think this is a lot of people's favorite because of the dial. This is the second in the two that celebrate the natural beauty of this region of Japan where our mechanical watch studio is. This is SBGW263, and the inspiration behind this is from the silver birch tree forest, which is in this region. And as you can see through the forest, you can see those tones of kind of white and silver and green. And this dial has been designed to kind of catch those reflections and mimic that same forest. Now, this dial is done by precise machining rather than hand engraved, but it is manually operated, so it's still very difficult to get this finishing. I almost thought it looked a bit peacock-esque, if anyone knows that particular reference, but it's an absolute stunning piece to see, and has this kind of dual curved sapphire over the top, and it's in rose gold. Now this one is, I believe, the most expensive Grand Seiko we have had to date. This is SBGD 205. This watch is a jewelry piece and is created at the Micro Artist Studio. Now, the Micro Artist Studio is in Shinshu region of Japan, and it's a collection of master craftsmen and artisans who do some fantastic pieces. Some you may have heard of, such as HU2, the Credal Minute Repeater, the Sonnerie. And this particular piece is an 8-day power reserve watch. The inspiration behind this is the winter morning shimmer in Shinshu, and the dial has a diamond dust dial, and on there is actually a constellation of Leo, which is a lion, which ties in extremely nicely with the Grand Seiko line. On the dial, you can see around the edge, there is actually diamonds and blue sapphires. These are very delicately placed onto a white gold base and frame. And there's 96 diamonds altogether, 25 sapphires, I believe. And it still has great legibility, because if you look at the diamonds placement and the blue sapphires, the diamonds represent minutes and the blue sapphires represent hours. So it still has great legibility. On the reverse here, you can see the case back design, so the open sapphire. This is actually done with a single bridge, which I've heard is very difficult to kind of master because everything's got to be in place. But with that, it's actually not only showing the power reserve on the right, which is 8-day power reserve using 3 barrels, but the top left, you can see an outline. This outline is the outline of Mount Fuji in Japan. The blue heat-treated screws and the jewels represent the local town of Town Suwa, which is in location to Mount Fuji. And if you look to the bottom right of this, below where you can see the name 8-Day, there is actually the engraving of the Micro Artist Studio design, logo, which represents where this Micro Artist Studio sits in relation to Mount Fuji and Suwa in this region of Japan. So it's a nice little map on the back of your watch. The next pieces we've got here are recreations of the original Grand Seiko, the 3180. So these are now core pieces. They are the SBGW 257, 258, and 259. The differences between this and the original is the case size has increased from 35mm up to 38mm. These are very slim at 10.9mm. They all feature an open case sapphire back to showcase the manual wind movement, and all have a deployant buckle now. The piece on the left is a Platinum 950 with a white gold dial and white gold hour markers indices. The central piece is a yellow gold piece with the yellow gold, 18 karat gold indices. And the far right is a new Grand Seiko piece which features brilliant hard titanium. Now this titanium is twice as hard as steel and is exclusive to Grand Seiko and comes up extremely bright. So the last piece I'm going to talk to you from this year's releases. I know we've kind of whizzed through this extremely quickly, but we want to kind of get to a discussion and question and answers rather than listen to me drone on. So the last piece is the SBGW 262. It's an 18 karat gold 39mm case. Now this comes, the dial itself is a curved dial and has a domed, dual domed sapphire over the top. And on the dial, it has a rushi lacquer from trees by Mount Fuji. So it's not imported lacquer, it's actually from the region, this region of Japan near Mount Fuji. How they get it to this dark black is they actually mix iron with it as well to give it that very jet black look. As you can see, the craftsman that creates these is called Ishu Tamura. You'll have to excuse my pronunciations. And to improve legibility, at the 12, 3, 6, 9, and the GS logo are all used, are all created using a technique called Maki A, which is basically kind of gold dust that's put onto there to make sure that it kind of holds up off that black dark dial, and kind of beautiful freehand design. Very stunning, simple design, as I'm sure you can appreciate. So, over to Joe to talk us through these new Grand Seiko 9SA5 and 9R movement for spring drive and high beat.
Thank you, Rob. Much appreciated. So as Rob was explaining, very exciting year for Grand Seiko. We have the 60th anniversary, which is going to be the new horizon. Right, this is the dawn of a new era for Grand Seiko. And in honor to pay tribute to that, we have taken some of our highest level of quality movements that we make, both being spring drive and our high beat 36,000 caliber, and we have enhanced them. Right, where you thought you couldn't get any better than spring drive, we have done it. Now we have spring drive that's more accurate, longer power reserve, and better finishing, and the list goes on. With our high beat 36,000, we've incorporated a lot of new techniques that have been found in hot horology for many decades, even centuries. However, we've done it with our own unique twist, all very innovative and unique aspects. Of course, we've also increased the stability and performance and duration and everything about these watches. These new movements, more specifically, is paving a path for Grand Seiko's future. And it's really an exciting time. So as Rob introduced you, we're going to be introducing the new spring drive caliber into our new 600 meter professional grade diver, and our high beat 36,000 we're going to be introducing into a limited edition of 100 pieces worldwide, 18 karat gold, new heritage collection design. So to get started, I'm going to start with our current high beat, which is a phenomenal movement. You know, this new one that we have obviously is going to exceed it in every way, shape, and form possible. That's just the nature of Grand Seiko. We want to keep outdoing ourselves as much as we possibly can. But the current high beat, while it's not at this new level, is still an amazing movement. To give you an idea of the differences between the two, our current high beat caliber utilizes only one barrel. And in a high beat, to have 55-hour power reserve with one normal sized barrel is uncommon. Typically, you need to make the barrel larger or something along those lines. You need to have a big barrel in order to get a relatively long power reserve if it has a high frequency, because it consumes more energy. So the single barrel that we have utilizes a special mainspring, which we call Spron alloy, our own in-house alloy, to achieve that 55-hour power reserve instead of just having a big barrel with a long mainspring in there. We use a conventional shape. The lever escapement is utilized in our current 9S8 series, our high beat caliber as it's sold today. But we use a special manufacturing technique we call MEMS. And that allows us to basically make the parts on a micron level tolerance and make them lighter, smoother, harder, so that they're longer lasting, more energy efficient, and even can retain lubricant, as you'll see on the little step off to the side here. So this is, these are unique attributes to a system that's been around for over a couple hundred years. And then lastly, all of these have been traits of Grand Seiko in terms of our spring assortment. There's one more thing I'm going to show you also, but all Grand Seikos in production up until today, essentially, have utilized a flat hairspring. And so not an overcoil, not a Breguet overcoil or Breguet style overcoil. So a flat hairspring. Really, I mean, a Breguet overcoil has the benefit of maintaining its concentric shape across positions, right? So that's the benefit of an overcoil. With a flat hairspring, if it's adjusted well, it can maintain that same center, right? It's going to breathe more organically and more consistently. And so the way that we make and hand adjust our hairspring, you don't necessarily have that problem of having to worry so much about positional change. But with the use of the flat hairspring, we also utilize what we call a regulator balance, or what any company would call a regulator balance. And it uses this arm to change the length of the operation of the spring, and this little micro adjustment screw here to change the accuracy. And so these are traits that all Grand Seikos have basically used since Grand Seiko was introduced in 1960. And this regulator balance allows a great deal of tolerance, right? You can adjust the accuracy on a very broad range, from fractions of a second per day to potentially minutes per day utilizing this system. So it's got a very broad range, where if you were to use the alternative, which is a free sprung balance, you don't have that leeway. It's only small adjustments that you can make. So this is how we've done watchmaking up until today. And that leads me into the 9S-A5. So the 9S-A5 was designed by Hisashi Fujieda. And Fujieda was also on the development team for the 9S-85, our previous generation. And he actually looked to our past to kind of pave the path for this new caliber. So in studying some of our historical movements, namely the 45 GS caliber, like the 4520, one of our very renowned vintage models, one of my favorite personally, this is where he gained the inspiration for this new caliber, the 9S-A5, looking directly at the 45 GS of the past. Now, obviously, there's a lot of advancements from then to now, so we'll kind of get in what makes it different. So here's the 4520 compared to the new 9S-A5. One thing you'll notice right away is that this utilizes a balance bridge, which there's only two models in Grand Seiko that have ever utilized a balance bridge, this being the first being actually the 44 GS. So this is also executed in the 9S-A5. So like I said before, we've utilized some kind of renowned attributes of hot horology in this new caliber, but put our own twist on them. So for one of these instances, we developed a completely new overcoil, our own version of an overcoil we're calling very simply the Grand Seiko overcoil. So this is, of course, hand-adjusted to shape, utilizing a special jig, and is optimizing the performance. However, it's not just your standard overcoil. This is actually a patented shape that has gone through basically what they did at our Shizuku-ishi manufacturer was they put the shapes of various hairsprings, over 80,000 different hairspring potential shapes were tested, analytically tested, to see how they would perform. And this is one of those 80,000 different shapes that we determined to have the best performance and stability across the various positions and in overall performance for everyday wear. So because it's patented technology, we're not disclosing how this differs from other overcoils there are in the industry, but be assured it is another big breakthrough from Grand Seiko. Another aspect is the free sprung balance. Free sprung balance has been around for seemingly forever, never utilized in Grand Seiko. And the free sprung balance is compared to the regulator balance that we had. Instead of using the little plus minus screw and the lever that you saw earlier, we're just really utilizing these screws to adjust the speed of the balance by turning them inward or outward. And so the free sprung balance has benefits that it's actually more shock resistant. In a regulator balance, if you drop the watch, that little arm could come a little loose or out of position, and it will actually affect the accuracy, and it could be pretty traumatic. So, you know, this is a downside, but also, you know, you have to consider there's that greater span of adjustment that's available with the regulator balance. So the reason we're introducing free sprung in Grand Seiko is because we've developed a new and patented way, so we're not going to disclose a lot of information on it today, but a new patented way to expand our accuracy tolerance for adjustments. So we can actually utilize not just these screws, but a special rotatable stud that will allow us to adjust the isochronism or the beat error in the watch as well, which wasn't possible on free sprung before. So greater span of correction if ever need be, but still retaining that same, you know, durability that would come along with the free sprung balance. So here's an actual real life image of the balance bridge with the adjuster and the free sprung screws, and you can kind of see your overcoil starting in here. So, and you'll notice the finishing is quite different than what we have on our previous generation as well. So one of the biggest breakthroughs and probably the most talked about thing of our what was supposed to be Grand Seiko Summit introductions, and I say that just because, you know, simply the coronavirus epidemic has unfortunately caused us to cancel our plans, just as everyone else in the watch industry. So you know, a very tragic time. You know, while I'm on that subject, you know, just want to say we hope everyone's well. You know, doing well, their families are doing well, and you know, everyone's maintaining the best they can throughout this terrible situation. So our best regards, of course, from Grand Seiko. But jumping back into our new caliber, we've developed a new iteration of an escapement. So escapements are not always new. You know, the lever escapement has been dominantly used in the industry for many, many years, and it hasn't changed all that much. I mean, there's been great advancements, but it's not necessarily, there's a handful of changes in comparison. So to how many companies are actually using them and for how long. So we developed in-house a new strategy for an escapement we call the dual impulse escapement. So really the goal of this is to maximize efficiency and deliver consistent energy. That's really the end game. I'm going to probably spout out a bunch of technical jargon that's going to make no sense. And if it does, great. If it makes sense, great. If it doesn't, you know, the end game for this is optimizing energy efficiency and consistently delivering energy. All right. So just like in our MEMS escapement that we have now, we have a skeletonized design for what is our pallet fork. It's a very unconventional shape for a pallet fork. And our escape wheel, which is also, again, a very unconventional shape. So I've kind of developed this simulated process for our new escapement to kind of show you how it's working. And yes, it locks and unlocks much like a lever escapement, much like any escapement does. You know, but there's traits of both the lever escapement and the detent escapement in this watch that make it quite unique. So when you look at the overall slow motion performance, you have the locking position where the tooth is locked by the jewel. That's your stop. And then your go motion is delivering a direct impulse. So they use this jewel here, which is a pallet jewel on the roller for the balance wheel, and it delivers energy from the escape wheel directly to the roller, in turn improving the energy that's delivered to the balance wheel, giving it an extra boost of energy basically, right? And that helps increase amplitude and overall consistency. Next motion you'll see as the balance wheel moves is the second locking position. So at the locking plane of this pallet jewel, you can see the tooth is stopped on its finest point, and as the balance turns back around, an indirect impulse of energy is delivered through the sliding action across what they call the impulse plane, or this little angled aspect of the pallet jewel. So that's where it's delivering its second impulse, much like you would find in a lever escapement. So the first direct impulse is kind of like what would occur in a detent escapement, where the indirect impulse is what would occur in a lever escapement. So you can kind of see the hybrid forming of these two worlds in these very small, very lightweight and energy efficient components. So very big breakthrough in terms of how we have improved not just the stability of the watch in terms of the balance wheel rocking back and forth and having consistent energy, but also improving the power reserve. So this is a big benefit by utilizing our MEMS manufactured parts, very lightweight, and also delivering energy consistently. So like I mentioned, it's very energy efficient. So we're able to achieve a long power reserve, and we utilize 2 barrels for the first time in Grand Seiko, 2 conventional sized barrels that unwind and wind up simultaneously and deliver that energy through the gear train to the balance through our new escapement. So 2 barrels, like I said, same size, unwinding and winding up all at the same time. And the gear train we've designed completely new also. So basically all the gears are on the same plane. And that way we can reduce the overall thickness by 15%. So we've added all these really cool benefits, and we've actually made the movement thinner, which is a really difficult thing to do. To add features and complexity and to reduce overall thickness is very difficult. But you have to also consider, typically when a movement gets thinner, it compromises its durability. We did not make any sacrifice in this 9S-A5 compared to the previous generation in terms of overall durability. They are just as durable. And then, of course, as you've learned about Grand Seiko over the years, the design is inspired, of course, by nature. So the nature surrounding Shizukuishi is Mount Iwate, which is visible from the studio. If you're sitting at the watchmaker's bench and you take a look out the back window, you see Mount Iwate. And outside of the factory, there's also the Shizukuishi River. So on this movement, you have the outline of Mount Iwate and the bend in the Shizukuishi River that are emulated in this new 9S-A5 caliber. So this movement's overall finish has been enhanced. The striping is done in a different execution than you see on other Grand Seiko models to give it more of a matte finish, but also with distinct ripples. Again, to pay tribute to the nature surrounding Shizukuishi River, the ripples of the river are expressed in the striping, or the ripples in the stripes. And then we have beveled edges and blued screws and perlage under the main plate, everything, anything that you can see. So finishing has been enhanced overall.
Joe, I have a quick question from the audience.
Yeah, of course.
How long it took to develop this new in-house escapement?
So, I mean, just for this movement overall is about a decade. So in breaking down the actual, just the escapement aspect, probably throughout that 10 years has been that development. We've actually devised many different types of escapements in the process. And this is kind of a culmination of the best of all of those different worlds, let's say. So there was a lot of research and development that went into the escapement alone. But overall for this movement, over 9 years, so close to 10 years for this. I
mean, it's quite a technical achievement to all the changes that you've showed us. So it's really no, I mean it's a big breakthrough, and I think that a lot of people have, our current high beat is very revolutionary in many ways, and it came out 10 years ago. So what's interesting is Mr. Fujieda probably finished with the 9S-85,
and started work right away on the A5 and how, how are we going to make it better? And, I mean, realistically, Grand Seiko has always had this philosophy of, progressing to the next level. It's always about what can we do better. And, with achievements in watchmaking like this and with spring drive in general, as an example, you can look at this company overall as incredibly innovative and never stopping, never slowing down in terms of what's next for the brand. And now with such a big focus on Grand Seiko, you're going to see that, this is the new era. This is the next gen. So that's our 9S-A5, and to give you the details on our new spring drive, right? We introduced a new spring drive into our professional grade diver case, which is utilized in our high beat movement right now. We have a professional grade diver, but we are now introducing spring drive to it. And a part of the reason we're doing this is we're making a movement that is also thinner, just like the high beat, but we're putting it in a robust, thick watch, and maybe it didn't make sense to people. The reason we're doing that is because this is a 5 millimeter thick movement, and again, gets thinner, you're going to lose rigidity or durability in most movements. And the reason why we're showcasing this in such a robust watch is because we've enhanced the durability in this new spring drive movement, even comparatively speaking to the previous generation of spring drive, which is ridiculously durable. It can withstand a lot. So we're showcasing that this watch is, the watch's movement, even though so thin, is compliant with ISO standard for shock resistance for a dive watch. So the movement designer is named Aichi. So, you may be familiar with the H2, very popular Credal model, similar pronunciation of the name, just a little extended, as you can see with the I. But Mr. Hiraya is the movement designer behind the 9R-A5. And he was also one of the designers behind the spring drive chronograph GMT, which is what I have on. So Mr. Hiraya is definitely a brilliant engineer and designer, and he wanted to kind of overcome the biggest challenges with spring drive, which were how are we going to make it more accurate, how are we going to give it a longer power reserve, and how are we going to make it more durable? Because spring drive already, for a self-winding watch, has achieved the pinnacle in all of those things. So his goal was to make it thinner, right? Put it in a smaller package, add all these benefits, put it in a smaller package. And in order to do so, we had to move our famous magic lever. This is our self-winding system that allows for bidirectional winding that's very energy efficient. Seiko developed and patented in 1959. So it always typically sits right under the rotor. And you'll notice in this picture, it's kind of off-centered. This is what we call the offset magic lever. And it's through a new manufacturing technique, we're allowed to pivot this staff that runs through it and make it off-center, but not lose its efficiency. Because typically, if we were to make it more distant from the rotor, you would lose either the efficiency or you would have to put an intermediate wheel, which would also increase the energy loss in the process. So big breakthrough, basically due to a new manufacturing technique. And this is, kind of part of our game, right? In order to make parts better, we have to learn new techniques and advance in many different realms aside from just making parts. So just like the high beat, we're using 2 barrels in our new spring drive to achieve a long power reserve of 5 days, where the high beat, is very power consuming for the high frequency, is only 80 hours, which is the longest. It's 45% increase on our high beat compared to our old one, and 60% pretty much more than any 36,000 on the market today. In case of spring drive, we already had a 3-day power reserve there, so we needed to push it even further, and we pushed it by 2 more additional days, which is ridiculous to think about. We did it with what we call dual-size barrels. Now, I always tell people spring drive has a lot of extra components compared to most automatic watches. Generally starting over 270 components for an automatic spring drive, which is a lot. So we need to maximize space. And same along with the offset magic lever, we were able to put it in a certain position because we developed what we call dual size barrels. So a very unconventional approach in watchmaking, to use one barrel that's very small and one barrel that's large, and to utilize both of these unwinding virtually simultaneously again to achieve the long power reserve. So this, because they're not the same size barrel, there's no dead space in between them, and we can put more components here. So that allows us to extend the power reserve from 3 to 5 days while maximizing space and keeping its compact, size overall. So another big thing is we increase the accuracy, right? Spring drives are already the most accurate automatic you can buy. How did we improve it? Well, big part of that is a new development in integrated circuit technology. So as many of you probably know, spring drive utilizes a quartz crystal to develop its frequency for accuracy, right? Because quartz crystal tuning fork is so much more accurate than a balance wheel, and it's 8,000 times faster in terms of its overall motion. It's got a great benefit in terms of accuracy. Well, what we did is we developed a new integrated circuit that houses both the quartz crystal and the integrated circuit, and it's in its compact package. So we call it the spring drive package IC. And this eliminates, not only space, but more importantly, overall efficiency, and also gives us the ability to create temperature compensation in spring drive for the very first time. So quartz crystal is very minutely affected by temperature. This temperature compensation IC is similar to what we use in Grand Seiko quartz, the 9F quartz. However, is not utilizing a battery as its power source, still using mechanical energy as the power source. So it doesn't have, the power consumption is very low compared to what you see in the quartz. And this is giving us the enhanced accuracy of 10 seconds per month, minimal deviation, or maximum, I should say, deviation in spring drive. So elevated above 15 seconds per month on the previous generation. And also, for the first time, you can see the integrated circuit in spring drive. I don't know if anyone has ever noticed this, because there's not a lot of quartz in the world with open case backs. We've made a few, but quartz watches, spring drive watches utilize an integrated circuit. However, it's typically hidden, and there's good reason for that, because it's typically affected by UV light or static electricity. Various factors can contribute to the performance of an integrated circuit. This is the first time that you're able to actually see an integrated circuit in a spring drive, which could potentially also be used in a quartz watch, though it's not. But this is because of this new breakthrough in IC technology. So basically, it's not affected by any of the things that I listed. And we've made it more durable by constructing a one-piece bridge. As Rob was telling you before, with the 8-day, we have this big one-piece bridge, which is in a watch that's $50,000, plus, ranging in US dollar at least 42 to 59,000. And then with the jewels that you saw, if you're one of the lucky 10, 185,000, I think, is the US price. I don't know what that's what that is in GBP. Rob, you'd be able to answer that for me. But it uses a one-piece bridge. It's thick and durable, and it holds all the components in place very efficiently. It increases its durability, and it improves energy efficiency. And so what we're doing with this new spring drive movement is the same thing, except in a smaller, more compact form. So the one-piece center bridge protects all the gears in the gear train, all the levers and gears in the crown system, and this is enhancing its durability, but also at the same time improving energy efficiency. And again, we've added a lot, and we've made it thinner. So 14% thinner. Same with the high beat. We've also lowered the position of the crown. I didn't mention this on the high beat, but we lowered the position of the crown because that lowers the center of gravity in the movement and actually makes it feel more comfortable on your wrist. So these new watches we're introducing are going to have a different feel in comparison to previous generation of Grand Seiko, a little bit, better. One thing I also didn't mention before I get on this subject of the beauty of the finishing is both of these models are going to have virtually instantaneous date as well. So the window for the time change is very dramatically reduced. So it's, you know, another advancement that we have, on top of overall feel, like when you're manually winding the watch. There's a lot of improvements that we've made to these movements that we haven't really talked about yet. So you were some of the first to learn about them today and actually see some of these pictures, some of the first in the world to see some of these things today. So we hope you enjoyed, at least. But lastly, we'll talk about the finishing of this new movement, which is another big breakthrough in manufacturing, actually, believe it or not. So first and foremost, the design is inspired by nature, right? So hoarfrost on the trees, very fine frost that you see appear on the branches when it's very cold. From the Takabochi Highlands, or the Shinshu or Suwa region of Japan, central Japan, where we make our 9R series calibers, is the inspiration for the frosted finish you'll now find on the rotor and the rotor bridge. Also, the jewels and the blued screws are supposed to emulate the stars in the night sky, similar to as you saw on the 8th day. And then we have a new finishing technique which allows us to create rounded beveled edges in a watch that's going to be just over, you know, $11,000 US. Typically, to achieve rounded beveled edges like this, or concave beveled edges, this would have to be done by hand filing and come from our micro artist studio and start at about $40,000-$50,000. Through a new manufacturing technique, we're able to create a similar effect in a watch that's just over $10,000. So $11,100 US is going to be the price on it. So this is a big breakthrough in terms of improving the quality of finish, while still making it attainable, not making it, you know, top tier hot horology finishing. Obviously, you get more for the price, you know, in terms of getting that shape, but you don't have necessarily the hand craftsmanship that comes along with the micro artist studio pieces. So it's kind of best of, you know, best for each price segment is what our goal is. You know, we need more diversity. So on that note, I'll say thank you on behalf of Grand Seiko US, and I'll leave it to Rob for the rest. But hope you enjoyed.
Thanks, Joe. As always, your technical presentations convey so much information and detail that I really appreciate that. I think folks also appreciate the detailed explanations of all the new movements and what you guys have been able to achieve. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. It's, you know, it was probably a lot of information for everyone to digest, but don't worry, you'll be able to continue to learn more about them online and through various other outlets. We'll keep doing things like this, you know, as time goes on, as you know, as much as we're stuck inside as we can, right? Well, you know, our folks, we like you to get as technical as possible. So, you know, and I mean, the one thing that's really missing is a drink. I mean, I'm really sad. It's not a normal RedBar situation. I'm not drinking. It's not even noon yet here. So.
Well, Joe, in the words of the famous song, it's 9 minutes to 5 here, so you've got 9 minutes to wait.
Perfect. Cool. So should we jump on to some questions? And yeah.
So I had a couple questions about dials and I want to get back to that, but there's a couple of other questions in the Q&A. So one of the questions is, does Grand Seiko plan to make more complicated watches with interesting complications? And you know, the comment based on your comment about the instantaneous or the close to instantaneous date jump is that they said it'd be interesting to see a spring drive perpetual calendar with an instantaneous date jump. So I know you guys, you know, you can't necessarily, you know, comment on, you know, future developments, but do you think that, you know, this innovation could be applied to other movements in the future?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Grand Seiko is all about practical watchmaking, right? So a complication, I mean, I personally, you know, first and foremost, knowing nothing about future product, you know, we can't disclose anything about future product, even if we do know about it, you know, so keep that in mind, of course. But, you know, it's a practical watch. You know, that's the goal of Grand Seiko, the ultimate in practical watchmaking. So I think a perpetual calendar is a practical complication. I could potentially see that as a possibility. Whether or not they're planning to do that, I don't know. I hope.
I'll take that as a yes.
I think.
Thanks for joining us, by the way.
Yeah,
A little emergency in the morning, but we're all set here. Nope, it's just.
As long as you're good, that's all we care about. You know.
Yeah, this house is collapsing.
Got your GS T-shirt on.
Well, yeah. Then I realized I wasn't representing properly, so.
Hey, Joe.
Now I'm here. Now I'm ready.
Somebody asked in the comments about the usage of these movements in the future. Are they going to stay with the limited editions that we see here, or are they going to be something that goes forward more into future product as well? I know you can't talk about what exactly it might have to be, but if it will be.
Yeah, I'll just expand very quickly on the last question as well while answering that at the same time, I guess.
Thanks, Rob.
The new two movements, the high beat and the spring drive, will be in future models. Obviously, they've spent a lot of time developing these, and they will be used in future models. Obviously, you can't quote at the moment if they will be in just limited editions going forward or core pieces, but you will definitely see both these movements in future models. As I kind of said, with this being the anniversary year, it's kind of new energy, new rebirth, and these are some new movements that will continue to expand out. I guess a secondary question to that could even be, does that mean that the old movements are discontinued? There's no word of that either. They're currently continuing on with the movements that they've done previously, but these have been newly introduced and they will be rolled out. In regards to other complications, I think, as Joe touched on, I think Grand Seiko has kind of core principles, one of them being legibility, beauty, precision, and they were made to be the kind of ideal gents watch. And I think sometimes complications can take away from that kind of ideal design and legibility, and almost look a bit gimmicky in times. And I think often that's where people aren't aware, but we actually have the range of Credal, which sits in largely in this micro artist studio for complications. So we have pieces that are tourbillons, minute repeaters, sonories. So we do have, high end watchmaking complications that go into these kind of pieces within the Seiko Corporation. But whether we'd see certain complications like that within the Grand Seiko range, it would depend on whether it kind of fits into that core principle of what Grand Seiko stands for, I guess.
That makes sense. Great.
Yeah. I always said, like I was saying before, Grand Seiko is the ultimate for practical watchmaking. Credal is like the ultimate impractical watch.
The expression of the masters.
I mean, that's really what its focus is,
Yeah.
right? It's all about art, and they each have their own place. And even though, I mean, Credal is not a globally marketed and sold brand yet, but we do have small allocations that both of our markets do get from time to time, while in very, very limited capacity. So.
Okay. I have another question, and it's a technical one for you, Joe. Is what increase in amplitude comparing the dual impulse escapement and a normal impulse?
So in terms of increasing the amplitude, it would be really just in that one direction. So that, I mean, that in terms of utilizing that direct impulse. So unfortunately, I haven't seen what the amplitude is going to be on this new generation of caliber in comparison to the previous generation. I can assume that it will be consistently higher. And what's interesting too about Grand Seiko high beat calibers is the amplitude, like the 9S85 that we've been making for almost the last 10 years, over the last 10 years now. It does have high amplitude, which is uncommon in a high frequency caliber. So, it's an interesting approach, but also for Grand Seiko movements in general, and more specific to our high beats, that's also kind of unusual, is we use a large size balance wheel. Typically you reduce the size of the balance when you get into higher frequency, and that does not happen with Grand Seiko caliber. So you can have an 8 beat per second or 10 beat per second, and they're roughly the same size balance wheel.
From the same person, they also said, does this mean a traditional time grapher won't be useful with this years down the line when watchmakers get their hands on them?
No, I mean, a time grapher will still work.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We have another question about movements, which is what are the service intervals for spring drive movements, generally speaking?
So that's a complex question that, we have recommended service intervals for spring drive that, with any Grand Seiko, you look in the instruction manuals and it's going to tell you 3 to 5 years for a service interval. And that's strictly because of lubricants. Lubricants have generally a lifespan of about 5 years on the shelf, no matter what type of lubricant they are. If it's sealed in a jar on top of a watchmaker's bench, it typically will last 5 years before it changes in viscosity. So if it gets a little bit thicker, then it could affect the way the watch performs. So that's why we recommend that type of interval. However, the other aspect is for gaskets. Gaskets, if they expand and contract, let's say, you shower with your watch every day in a hot shower, the water vapors getting into the gasket, making it expand, and then it contracts, and then it starts to eventually crack after it dries out. So, and that takes years, but still, every 3 years you should inspect and check the gaskets. So this is what we recommend in the book. I own a spring drive that's 12 years old now. I'm so used to saying 11 for the past year, and I've never had it serviced. Spring drive doesn't have collision friction in the escapement system. It does not have kind of the wear and tear that comes along with the traditional mechanical watch. So while it's hard to determine, what could be the suggested interval, it's realistically, it goes a very long time. At least from my personal experience, I have spring drives that are over 20 years old. The first generation of spring drive I own still runs perfectly fine. The first spring drive I ever bought was 2008. So January of 2008, and that still keeps within 2 seconds per month. Still keeps a full 3-day power reserve. So, realistically, it's a very hard thing to determine. We recommend that you keep your watch healthy is my best suggestion. So have it cleaned and re-lubricated, kind of at your discretion when you feel comfortable, is I think the best thing, because I'll wear it into the ground. I'll run it till it stops working, because I'm basically testing all of my watches, and I have at least, I think, 5 or 6 spring drives. So the youngest one is a year old, excuse me.
Okay. Another question about the movement. I actually noticed this as well, that there looked like there's some interesting perlage-like finishing on the last spring drive movement that you showed us underneath the IC.
Good catch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that too.
What's the technique that goes into that particular finishing? I thought that was really interesting to see that little bit of. It's one of those things about Grand Seiko that the attention to detail and the things like that are present in all of your watches. So what is the finishing technique for that?
I would generally I would generally point that out if I was allowed to talk more about it. So this is a new proprietary finishing technique that we have. We're not disclosing any information of how it's achieved.
Okay.
But we can call it petal patterning.
I was gonna say it looked like the seasons watch, the Shunbun, a little bit. The winter.
It's got that vibe to it. Right? Yeah.
Joe and Rob, I just wanted to say that as an aesthetic person, as somebody who's very visual myself, I really appreciate that Grand Seiko has also improved, not necessarily improved, but made the new movements, the finishing, extremely beautiful in my eyes. So I really appreciate that. I just wanted to make that comment.
So we will relay the message to the people that really, deserve to hear it, because we're not responsible. But we're excited about it, just as you are.
Oh, it is really beautiful. Speaking of the Seasons collection that came up, the Seasons collection, a couple of people that are outside of the U.S. Have mentioned that they, would really like to get their hands on them. So they'd like to know if there's any plans for those to be available. Or other limited editions that might be for other countries, like for the UK.
I forgot that's a regional limited edition.
So it's not limited per se, like a limited to a certain number, but it's very limited in terms of production. And our plan, yes, is maybe to expand it to other markets at some point in time. Right now, we're having some real difficulties being able to keep inventory for the U.S. market alone. All of our boutiques and our dealers are going through this struggle right now, especially with spring and winter. where we just can't deliver.
Yeah.
So yeah, it might be, you know, if we do plan to move forward, taking it to other markets, it may be some time before that can occur.
Yeah, I understandably from the UK perspective have asked on many occasions.
And you know, we'd be totally willing to help you out, you know, but it's.
But similarly, as Joe explained, the answer that I've generally had from Japan has been that they're struggling to fulfill demand within the US, so it wouldn't even make sense right now to consider going global. But it's not off the cards per se.
Yeah, the reception's been amazing on those too, and you know, it's the fact that it's not limited edition to any particular number gives us that capability to potentially bring it to other markets down the road. So, you know, we're hoping so, because it's you know, it's a bother for everyone.
Wow,
Especially Rob. Poor Rob. I feel so bad right now.
Yeah, I felt bad when the Kirozuri came out as well.
Well, I'm sure we'll be just as jealous at some point in time in our lives, right?
Yeah. Well, I think as well, in regards to other countries' limiteds, generally I think the company's kind of taken a step away from limiteds specific to regions, but you know, there are opportunities for growth and certain limited editions, and obviously we do limited editions every year for anniversaries and things, so there will be more limiteds coming. But I think we're aiming to try and make things more globally available. But as most of you probably know, Grand Seiko only went global in 2010. So to meet demand at global scales for the whole range of watches can be difficult at this moment in time. But we are actually expanding our Shizuku watch studio, which is soon to come.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah, that's a subject we should have brought up, is our new studio that we're opening, hopefully in June. I think it's going to be pushed back, is my guess, but you know, the new studio is going to give us the ability to expand and add more watchmakers, because right now Shizuku only has 20 watchmakers roughly, and that's not a lot for all of our 9S series calibers. So it's going to be several years down the road before it can happen, but we'll actually be able to add more watchmakers down the road. But it's not going to be immediate, unfortunately. You know, we need product, and we run out of stuff frequently, or whatever the situation may be. But you know, it's slow growth is also important too, and training of our watchmakers is a very rigorous process. So it'll be several years before we can really kind of increase the quantity of watchmakers.
Yeah, how long does it take to fully train a watchmaker to build those movements in that studio?
They say that the bronze certification in our Shizuku studio takes about 10 years, unless you're a very talented watchmaker. That certification process is a very, very difficult time. But bronze level certification, we have bronze, silver, and gold, are the three tiers of watchmaker in Shizuku is about 10 years, depending on the watchmaker's skill set, of course.
Wow.
Yeah, they have like a chart in the watch studio showing the different tiers of watchmakers and where they sit within there. I think it's worth saying as well, because I think throughout the presentations we mentioned a couple of times kind of master watchmakers, master craftsmen, those kind of terms. And in Japan, in terms of craftsmanship, it's hugely important, and people would much rather spend their time and be particularly amazing at one craft rather than learn a huge array of skills. So whether it be polishing, engraving, and there's awards that are given by Japanese government in terms of yellow ribbon or award to be a master craftsman. So that kind of thought to be a master at your particular skill set and doing that for 40, 50 years is much more preferred for the individual than having an array of skills, which is interesting. I mean, I think we tend to go for the UK as being more of a jack of all trades rather than a master of one. I'll speak for myself.
To get back into the dial discussion, you know, I know that the broader question that was asked earlier about how Grand Seiko dials are made is probably a very lengthy answer. But could you give us a little bit of more detail about the enamel or the sumie technique that was on the last gold piece that Rob showed us?
Oh, on the urushi lacquer. So yeah, So we this is one of the artisans that we utilize. It's not from one of our own studios, but he's a world-renowned artist who's done a lot of work in the pen industry. Oh, you got one. There it is. Perfect. So the artist his name is Ishu Tamura, as Rob mentioned. His capabilities are so broad. You know, he can make a perfectly flat black dial, and it's very nice, very well done. But what's I think separating him for Grand Seiko products specifically, and also keep in mind he also did the work for the Credal Fugaku tourbillon, the $460,000 tourbillon with the 18 karat gold waves and hand painted lacquer dial. This is a true artisan, and the difficulty that's achieved in terms of making this dial is special for Grand Seiko. Doing it on a curved surface because the dial is completely domed is a very intense process of polishing, because he has to make sure that it's consistent all the way across. When you're doing it on a flat surface, it's much easier to determine than when the watch dial is completely flat after polishing the lacquer. But on a curved surface, you encounter much more difficulty, much more time-consuming process. Also, the fact that they're using native-grown lacquer sap. It's grown in Joboji region of Japan, which is a neighboring town of where we make our watches in Morioka and Shizukuishi. So that's really cool. I mean, it's a really unique element, like homegrown lacquer.
Talk about in-house.
and basically in-house. I mean, it's a neighboring town. It's really amazing. And this is something that really, I mean, no other companies can claim. And Japanese urushi lacquer is extremely rare. I don't know if you realize that, but 80% of lacquerware is utilizing outside of Japan lacquer. So that's something to keep in mind as well. That we're using true homegrown urushi lacquer, which is very rare in the lacquer industry. So, and then the Makie lacquer is a 3-dimensional for the numbers, right? So he's doing pure platinum powder or 24 karat gold powder, kind of layered into this lacquer to create a 3-dimensional shape, which is what they call taka makie. Enables it to be 3-dimensional. And this artisan, I mean, he makes pens that, I mean, entry price is maybe $1,000, but you could spend $25,000, $35,000, $50,000 on one of this guy's pens. So,
wow, that's not a hobby I need to pick up at this point.
Another rough hobby that we all don't need, but probably a good chunk of us have.
Yeah. Maybe another question is, obviously dials are a big feature that a lot of people talk about with the brand, but the other big thing is the finishing on the cases, which is something that, again, usually is typically at a very, very high standard, if not one of the best standards in case finishing in the industry. Maybe a little bit about that for the audience.
Yeah. You want me to field it, Rob, or you want to? Your call.
I'll let you take the Zaratsu. You've got it in your bio on Instagram.
Another
so.
one. This could be with me talking especially, this could be a 3-hour conversation that we have right here. What I can do actually is, if you give me just a second, I'll pull up a little video that I've created from our factory. That
Joe, just put your private number in the chat so that everyone can just text you randomly.
Yeah, sure. I'm not that hard of a guy to find.
I think this is a big thing though with the brand. The dials are always the topic of conversation, and I think the finishing on the polishing is exceptional when you see them, and it's very hard to see without physically having one in your hand as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that's especially the thing with that SBGW264, the one that was inspired by the silver birch trees. And as you know, as having a few Grand Seikos yourself, even from the indices to the watch hands, and the way they're kind of multifaceted, people just never really notice that on the kind of still images you'll see on websites. When you actually pick up a watch and even kind of visually look at whether it be the case designs going down that Grand Seiko style, or these multifaceted hands and the legibility of that, and the way it plays with that kind of Japanese essence of light and shadow, where the shadow is just as important as the light because it basically enhances the light that it's next to. It's kind of almost ties into that Japanese culture that most people would never even think about. But once you know kind of thing.
Yeah, I think
about that dramatic contrast, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that someone had asked, I think one of you guys answered it once, was about the finishing on the hands. There's no lume in a lot of the dials or on the indices, but just the slightest amount of light catching the hands can allow you to read the time in that piece, whereas most watches otherwise you couldn't get that.
Well, you can actually see that in the back, and if you look behind Adam Moore's head in the macro that got, there's no lume on that dial, but it's really highly legible because of the way that the finishing on the indices and the hands are achieved. It catches the light, so you're really it makes for great legibility without having to incorporate lume.
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, contrast is what kind of creates that distinct Japanese aesthetic, right? This very dramatic contrast between light and shadow. And it also, for our watches, fortunately, we can utilize it to create high legibility. And that's, we do numerous finishing techniques just to create that. But the same is true with our cases. So I'll show you this little video I made on Zaratsu and kind of the whole process that it goes through in a very small nutshell. Is we start preemptively by buffing cases before the watch even goes through Zaratsu polishing. Like most companies, this is the finishing, right? This is buff polishing. So you're using the outer edge of a cloth type material wheel, where when you get into Zaratsu, you're using a hard metal abrasive wheel, with an abrasive on the front surface, taking the case to the rotating disc and essentially grinding it until it becomes a perfect distortion-free mirror. So there's a lot of work that goes into this process alone, but there are multiple steps in Zaratsu itself, multiple different types of finishing, abrasives. And, Zaratsu is kind of its own distinct thing. While Zaratsu, the name comes from a machine that was imported into Japan into the 50s. Zaratsu over the years has evolved into our own type of polishing technique with own proprietary abrasives or techniques or characteristics. We even have patented versions of Zaratsu polishing, which is pretty remarkable. So Zaratsu is not just one version of polishing, but then every case is completely finished in Zaratsu, and then the hairline finish is applied at the end. So, you have lots of different steps that are involved in Zaratsu polishing, even before you get to the hairline finishing. So just to kind of recap that, you buff, and then you light buff after you do Zaratsu, but Zaratsu is a multi-tiered attribute, and here you can see our iconic 44GS case design. And then hairlines applied. So to achieve the satin or the linear grain finish, you use either a wheel or this abrasive strip, or if the surface is very fine, you have to use like a little paintbrush. So this is the handwork that goes into Grand Seiko cases that makes it, next level. And, without disclosing too much, I mean, I just showed you a lot of really cool things. But this is one of the greatest attributes of Grand Seiko cases is doing all this finishing on flat surfaces and retaining a flat surface in the process, as well as having very sharp, crisp, distinct edges is the other aspect. Actually, let me go the other way. So when you look at our case designs, all of these flat surfaces, if you apply too much pressure to this flat surface, it's going to distort it, and the reflection is not going to be clean and crisp. Those sharp edges that you see, if you buff it too much, they're going to go dull. So this is the benefit of Zaratsu.
Joe, to bring this back to the new collection, the brilliant hard titanium, can that be Zaratsu polished? Yes,
that's it's a challenging material to work with. Actually, in working with the various materials, stainless steel would be the entry price. So let's say, and I say price just because I don't have a better word for it. In terms of work, stainless steel is the entry. Then you move up into our high intensity titanium alloy, as well as 18 karat gold. And then platinum is ridiculously hard to work with, where it can be 6 to 10 times the work of dealing with stainless steel. So
Yeah, and with Zaratsu, obviously you can buff and shine up a nice steel surface, but or other materials. But the idea of the Zaratsu with that rotating tin plate is to get that distortion-free mirrored finish, so it kind of reflects lines perfectly back at you. And he said that the craftsmen that can do this do it by sound, by sight, and by feel. And it's not a case of just doing each section bit by bit. Often they kind of rotate it with the pressure to make sure it's a consistent flow throughout the actual case. And as I said, any watch brand or any watches across, most price points can say they have a beautiful shine finish, but it's that distortion mirrored free finish that Zaratsu really tries to focus on, and that's what that rotating tin plate before the buff really tries to emphasize.
Yeah, and I've seen it when I photograph and full disclosure, I do some photography work directly for Grand Seiko, but when I do photograph the Zaratsu polishing, it's literally a mirror, and it's really kind of stupid and awesome. Whenever I get the chance to do it, it's kind of like, this is awesome.
You have to be careful too, though. I have a Blizzard Spring Drive GMT, and a couple of pictures I posted, you can actually see right up my nostril. It's a mirror. Having been to the factory and seen this process, it's kind of amazing. You walk in and it just seems like people are, okay, we're polishing a watch, but as Rob pointed out, it's all done by feel. Every single case, the craftsman who's in charge of that really doesn't have a guide. There's nothing that makes it perfect every time. They individually ensure that it's perfect. I can't think of any other brand at that price point that puts that amount of effort into the case. And again, it's something you have to see in person. I don't think that, well, Adam's photo behind him does a pretty good job, but it's really something else. And it's something I don't think I really got until I finally held one.
Yeah. And it kind of goes as well down to, like we said earlier, about the finishing on even the indices. Like when you get the chance to visit the factory and see what we've seen at these places, like you'll see the guy hand polishing these indices with holding a mirror to see the reflection from the other side, and 2 meters away from him is another artisan who's tempering the second hands to the steel second hands to get them that perfect blue, with a pair of tweezers, picking them off the heated plate, and when you kind of see these processes that every single Grand Seiko watch potentially goes through, depending on the model, obviously, but you start to get an understanding that how much craftsmanship and how many hours have gone into each and every individual watch, and why the global demand can't necessarily always be met, and why it was only until 2010 that Grand Seiko went international to be able to fulfill any kind of demand globally, I guess.
There's a couple of questions actually come up on that kind of theme. One of which is how long on average do you think it would take to produce a watch case? And if a watch is sent in for a service and it needs more polishing, is it the same process?
So for both Rob and I, this in terms of the after sales service aspect, we should be about the same now. I think you guys have a couple of watchmakers in your facilities in UK. Am I correct?
Yeah, we have 2 watchmakers in the UK that can service Grand Seiko, but not Zaratsu finish. I believe they're going to have someone in the Netherlands in the coming year or so who can do Zaratsu finishing, but we can service in the UK, but not do the Zaratsu finishing.
Understood. Okay, so what will be implemented in Netherlands? I believe we're not quite to the process of achieving Zaratsu outside of Japan. So if you want original factory finish, you would have to send the watch to be serviced and refinished in Japan. However, we have implemented what we call light polishing in the United States. Just recently, we had one of our watchmakers went through a pretty rigorous training process, and I know the guys in the Netherlands as well have been in this process as well. So they may actually have that available now. I'm not 100% sure on that, so I apologize. But sorry, I'm quite distracted right now. So the light polishing is essentially similar look to the Zaratsu machine, but we're getting proprietary abrasives sent that like Japan is sending us the abrasives for, and it's a very light refinishing that's not exactly technically Zeratsu, but it will give quick light removal of light brush scratches without losing the flatness or the sharp edges. So that's the important thing to remember. That it's very beneficial for not as much time or cost as sending it to Japan. So that would be an option. And there was another part to that question. I'm sorry.
The other part
started
was,
with the end of it.
I think it was the first part of the question was, when making a new case, what kind of man hours or what kind of time is involved in producing a case?
That's very hard to determine, because when you talk about all the processes that Grand Seiko cases go through, even at the factory, they couldn't define to you a specific amount of time, just because it's hard to do that with anything. Like a lot of people will say, oh, how long does it take the micro artist studio to make a movement? And they can't really say, it's like they produce, a small batch of parts, and then, the next steps come, stuff like that. But I mean, when you're talking about maybe one craftsman can do 15 cases in a day is kind of like the maximum that they could yield out of the one studio. It's not a lot. So hopefully it gives you a better idea of time and perspective.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much work that goes into it. I understand that it's hard to quantify, especially if the case makers and the polishers are doing things by feel. There could be variation, obviously, in the amount of time it takes them to polish a case. So so we don't have. I think we're out of questions unless the rest of the panel, Adam, David, Atom, have questions.
Well, I saw one question. This is directed towards you, Joe, and it's where does one get your Grand Seiko polo shirt?
I knew that question was going to come up, and I didn't want to have to answer it, but I always wear this shirt anyway. I don't wear it to our office. I don't wear it anywhere, because it's actually a friend from Sweden gave it to me. And so
Sweden's got what you've been needing?
It's as much as you would not anticipate that to be the answer. Got it from a good friend in Sweden, and unfortunately, there are no more to be had. But
just know somebody in Sweden. Easy.
In the future, Grand Seiko takes cue in this, and we produce some for other markets, like the UK as an example, and in the US, of course. But I mean, people in my office are yelling at me all the time. I want one of those shirts. I don't have any more.
Maybe there's a side business for us here, Joe.
I'm being asked now about my T-shirt, so I think I put myself on the hot seat. This shirt was actually part of the release of the Godzilla. So they took the lion that's typically part of the logo, but it's Gojira. But this was at an event in LA when they launched it. So I don't know where you could get one of these right now. So Joe, we should probably be careful with
real quick. That was some party, wasn't it?
Oh my God, that was yeah. Well, when you have like a beatbox and breakdancing Godzilla come out in the actual Godzilla costume. How much did that thing weigh? That was
the crate that it shipped over in was 500 pounds. I think the costume itself, I found out later, was like a couple 100 pounds, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it was there were rules in terms of how long the person could be in it before they had to. Yeah, and it's the actual Godzilla costume from Toho Studios.
Yeah, there's also rules on how long you can be in your black T-shirts. You really, make sure you change them.
But this is an exception, though. I feel like that this is the first time I've mixed it up and worn some color in a month. So, thank you, Grand Seiko. It is true.
I had one more point that I wanted to make. I did say in the comments is that the 15% thinner movement and the 14% for the spring drive. I think it's really important to highlight the fact that the durability is not sacrificed at all. That's a huge accomplishment for making a new movement, because you can make it thinner, but what's the point unless it's going to be at least as good as it was before?
Exactly.
So kudos.
In the case of the spring drive, even more robust than the previous generation, which is hard to believe.
Yeah. I think another one as well is even about the extended power reserve is you could make an extended power reserve with a single barrel. But one thing that Grand Seiko have really focused on is making sure that the durability of a long period is taken into consideration, so it doesn't make the mainspring more brittle. So that's probably why they've gone down a route of doing the dual barrel rather than a single larger barrel.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah, no,
makes sense.
Also has you know how like if your watch has a full power reserve, its torque is really high and the amplitude is really high and the accuracy is always, you know, usually accuracy is maybe best in the middle of a power reserve. Well, instead of doing sequential barrels where one unwinds and then the next one unwinds, you have this big fluctuation of torque being up and down and up and down. 2 barrels unwinding at the same time, you only have that up and down. And what's nice too is because the escapement, especially on the high beat, is so lightweight, when the power reserve gets lower, because the parts are actually 20% more efficient than what we have in our current high beat, which is hard to believe. The weight's reduced more essentially. When the power reserve gets low, you don't have as much worry about the barrel having to work as hard to push those parts because they're lighter weight, so that they can still deliver more consistent energy. So that's a big benefit in this new escapement as well.
So I want to ask you as a RedBar panel a question now.
Oh, I thought David was running.
He was. There's a wall there.
So I've typically always seen with Grand Seiko, I mean, even from Japan, they've sent people to the UK and to other countries to kind of get feedback from customers and journalists to see what their feedback is on Grand Seiko. And whether it be, you know, the introduction of ladies models and ladies calibers or what we're doing. And I think typically Grand Seiko have been very good at responding to fans and what the customers want, whether it be taking power reserves off certain spring drive models, creating thinner calibers. What do you guys want to see from Grand Seiko in the future, or what are you excited about?
Wow. I mean, that's a really easy question. Not easy at all. I just want to see more of the same. I'm still frankly amazed that you've taken the spring drive as my kind of go-to when I think of Grand Seiko. And I think my next watch will also be a spring drive. At some point, hopefully, I can get a proper high beat. But I think I just want to see more of the same. It's just better. I still can't believe what you've done with the movement. The fact that, as Joe was pointing out, and then Adam, I think, commented, what is hold on a second, Lola, you can do what you want to do.
My book.
Oh, my daughter needs her book. Sorry, I'm using it to prop up my phone. No, but the fact that you've taken everything and improved it. You didn't leave a single stone unturned. So I just want to see more of that. I mean, I hate the fact that I'm looking at my Blizzard right now and I'm thinking, man, how come you don't have an extra 2 days of power reserve? And why aren't you 15% thinner? I just want that.
Rob,
Yeah,
I think, go ahead, David.
No, I was going to say, I think the thing that I enjoy about many of the pieces is actually that there's a lot of pieces that you bring out that really challenge what you would expect. I think like the Lion and, you know, also the Godzilla piece was a piece that when you saw the pictures, you're kind of thinking, there's so much right and so much wrong with this, and you can't quite get your head around what you're looking at. And then when you see one or you feel one and you try it on, for something that's such a big watch with curves and square edges and everything, there's so many things that shouldn't be right about it. But when you eventually get it on your wrist, it just works. And I think that's the kind of thing that in a lot of watches, there's a lot of commonality with a lot of watches, a lot of brands, a lot of tradition. And I think Grand Seiko do sometimes throw that to the wind. And in a good way, they just do things that really challenge you. And you have most GS pieces you have are unlike anything else you have. And I think that's what makes them, for me, something that every time you put it on, you kind of have a little smile to yourself and you think, that was a good choice. Whereas there's lots of other pieces out there that you could put on and you could change the name on the dial and it could be anything. It's rare to find a GS. If you put anyone else's name in it, you'd be like, well, no, that's not right. A GS is just what it is.
Rob, I was going to say that besides the new improvements to your new movements, I really enjoy the manual wind spring drive. I think that's a really interesting, almost going not necessarily backwards, but going to, you know, the manual wind mechanical movements are basically where, you know, it all started, and it's going spring drive with it and making it thinner and almost more elegant. It for me, I really that vibes with me. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and I would echo Adam Craniotes' sentiment in saying more of the same. You know, the thing that I like about Grand Seiko is the combination of, you know, kind of going back and looking at the heritage of where it started, and then technological innovation married with that. I think that's one of the kind of hallmarks of the brand, and so I'd like to, you know, continue to see more of that. Specifically from a ladies perspective, like ladies pieces specifically, I don't necessarily think that, you know, I have a lot of opinions about this in the industry as a whole. I don't think you necessarily need to, you know, design a specific ladies piece, but I do like that you created an automatic caliber for something that's for women, because a lot of brands will dumb down, you know, watches for women and just slap a quartz movement in it and sprinkle some fairy dust on it and you know, go, it's pretty, pat the ladies on the head and send them on their way. So I do like that, you know, the pieces that you are creating for women have automatic movement in them. What I'd like to see more of is, you know, maybe not all ladies pieces have to have diamonds. You know, I understand that you can create pieces that are just, you know, for smaller wrists or for, you know, you can market them towards women if you want to, but, you know, they don't all need to be jewelry pieces. I think, you know, there are female collectors like myself out there, and some that haven't discovered that they're collectors yet, that might be turned off by a, you know, jewelry piece. So I would say, if you're going to continue to market towards women and make watches for women, that you take into account that not all women have the same opinion about jewelry watches. So
no, that's a great point. I mean, right now, I think in the international assortment, at least, of our ladies' watches, which is only about 7, I think, pieces, there's only one that's no diamonds, and that's it. And they're all sub 30, you know.
Yeah, and to that point, like, I don't, you know, you guys, well, you know me, Joe. My collection is almost entirely men's watches. Like, you know, the all of the stuff in my collection, I don't buy things that are traditionally marketed towards women. I buy mechanically interesting pieces. So, you know, the Grand Seikos I gravitate towards are, you know, spring drive or something that's, you know, like something that interests me from the movement perspective or the finishing perspective, something like that. You know, I specifically don't care if it's marketed towards men or women. I just like a watch for what it is. And I think the sort of watch industry as a whole would do better to understand that you know, women have lots of interests just like men do, and you know, there are women out there that I think would be really interested if there's just some more consumer education around why these watches are special.
Yeah, and I think the thing as well, there's plenty within the collection that could quite happily be a unisex piece. I think we'll end up going down a rabbit hole, won't we? But I think almost a lot of people go away from the traditional men's and women's watches nowadays, don't they? And it's kind of a watch is a watch, and if you like it, you like it. You know, who's defining who it's for or who it's not for? It's kind of individual taste, isn't it? And I think that's generally, because I think, well, both me and Joe were typically from retail backgrounds, and I always tried to find a piece for someone that spoke to them individually rather than, you know, market something towards them. You know, it's what speaks to you. And as David kind of touched on as well, that Grand Seiko are doing quite a lot of unique pieces now to unique tastes. And to be honest, previous years, when I first joined Grand Seiko, there was quite a lot of the same and similar style watches. You could look along a cabinet of 40 Grand Seikos and they'd seem quite samey. But in recent years, there's been a huge expansion in the kind of different array of types and styles. So I think there's something there for everyone nowadays. Well, I hope. And more to come.
I think so.
That's what all that, you know, that the brand independence, you know, that we declared in 2017. I mean, that was really what it was all about, starting to diversify expanding, you know, broadening our horizons. You know, we weren't really, you know, making too many divers watches as an example. We started making professional dive watches in 2017. Last year was a big focus on thin, elegant dress watches. You know, for Seiko company, Seiko Watch Corporation as a whole, you know, professional dive watches were the prospects. And yep, I'm talking with my hands. Is that? Oh yeah, there we go. And then the dress watches were Credal essentially. So if you were in Japan, you understood these differences, but you know, not many people know necessarily. And you know, unless you're like-minded like us, you know, you're not going to necessarily know what Credal is. You know, that's more of our dress watch artistic brand. You know, now Grand Seiko can kind of play in all fields. So,
Rob, one other thing that you asked what we'd like to see is I really appreciate how Grand Seiko has taken their heritage collections and done almost, you know, one-off versions, but also sort of taken those and extrapolated, especially the cases and the shapes that they have, that you guys have. It's great to, you know, differentiate each line now with, you know, with a different case shape, which is, that's fantastic for me because these, you know, it's a big thing right now in the industry to do a reinterpretation of your heritage pieces. And, you know, a lot of brands do that and they do an exact copy and that's all they can really do with it. And Grand Seiko goes further in that. And I like to see, I imagine where that could go, you know, and I like that. I like that.
So I think we're all saying you guys do a great job and keep it up. more of the same, more more innovation, and you know, just you're going in the right direction. So yeah, I think that you know, based on the comments and stuff that we've seen in the chat, you know, I want to thank you guys again for your time and all of the detail that you shared with us. Folks were, you know, really happy with all of the movement diagrams and all of the information that you shared. So we really appreciate you guys coming and sharing your expertise with us. Thank you so much, Joe. You know, I'm like a big fan of your technical presentations anyway, so I appreciate you sharing them with RedBar as a whole. So
the bee's knees, if you will, of the technical presentation.
Oh, the bee's knees, yes.
So for on the B drive, we made a joke a couple years back talking about how Spring Drive is sorcery, and it's really based, it's run by miniaturized Japanese bees. That's like the RedBar.
Mechanical Japanese bees.
No, we were supposed to keep that secret. That was not for public.
That wasn't for public, no.
Changed everything. Now the
magical bees.
It's out now.
Now it's out.
Yeah. So on that note, on the Spring Drive note, thank you so much for Rob and Joe for being our guests and giving us this awesome presentation. We will have it on our YouTube channel shortly, the recording, and we hope to see you guys soon in real life.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait for the next get together.
What is real life?
Kanpai.
Hopefully it's not this.
No.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.